Picture a long marble bench with a row of holes carved into it. Now picture 20 strangers sitting on that bench, shoulder to shoulder, no stalls, no walls, no doors, nothing between them but conversation. And picture a single sea sponge tied to the end of a wooden stick, getting passed politely from one hand to the next, down the entire row. This is a public toilet in ancient Rome. And here is the part that should genuinely concern you. This was not a place of shame. This was a hangout. People came here to relax, to gossip, to do a little networking, to catch up on who owed who money. Romans walked into a room full of strangers, sharing one communal sponge, and thought, you know what? This is nice. And honestly, that is not even the weird part, because the people who treated the toilet like a coffee shop also produced the highest paid athlete in all of human history, a man richer than any modern superstar who almost certainly could not read a single word. These are the same people who once took an entire stadium and filled it with water, real water, so they could sink real ships full of real men in front of a snacking crowd. And nearly everything you think you know about Romans throwing up during dinner so they could eat more, completely made up. The truth is so much stranger. So stick around, because by the end of this, I am going to show you something uncomfortable. I am going to show you that the Roman idea of fun is not actually ancient at all. It is sitting in your pocket right now. But we will get there. First, let me ruin public bathrooms for you forever. So, the baths. If you want to understand what Romans did for fun, you start here, because the bathhouse was basically the shopping mall, the gym, the spa, the bar, and the social network all crammed into one steamy building. The biggest of them, the baths of Diocletian, could hold around 3,000 people at once. 3,000. You did not go just to get clean. You went to exercise, to get a massage, to eat, to do business deals, to flirt, to hear gossip, and to be seen. Entry cost almost nothing on purpose, because keeping the public happy and bathed was good politics. Now, about that sponge on a stick. Historians actually argue about this one, which is the funniest possible thing to argue about. Some think the sponge, the tersorium, was used the way you are dreading, for personal cleanup, and then rinsed in a channel of running water or a bucket of vinegar and salt water, and yes, used again by the next person. Others think it was more like a toilet brush for cleaning the seat. Either way, take a moment to appreciate that 2,000 years from now, scholars are studying our bathroom habits, and the single biggest open question about Roman civilization is, quote, what exactly did they do with the stick? Glorious empire, conquered 3 continents, plumbing genius, and we are still not totally sure how they wiped, so they were clean on the outside. But what they got up to inside the house, that is where things start to get competitive. Because when Romans got bored, and they were bored a lot, they gambled on absolutely everything. Their favorite toys were little knuckle bones from sheep and goats called tali, which they threw like dice, a 4-sided bone, basically nature's original casino. They had proper 6-sided dice too. They had a game called Turni Lapilli that was just tic-tac-toe. They had one like backgammon called Tabula, and one like chess called Latruncoli, the little soldiers, where you trapped your opponent's pieces. And the gambling was so intense that technically it was illegal most of the year. Most of the year. We will come back to that because there was one week where the rules came off completely. But my favorite detail is the Emperor Claudius. The man ran the entire Roman Empire, and he was so hopelessly addicted to his board game that he had a gaming board mounted inside his personal carriage so he could keep playing while traveling. He literally wrote a book about how to win at dice. The emperor of the known world, bumping along a Roman road, going, no, give me a second, I'm about to make a great move. And when even the dice got boring, the Romans turned to the walls. Here is something they do not tell you in school. The Romans invented social media, except it was carved into plaster. In the ruins of Pompeii alone, archaeologists have cataloged more than 11,000 pieces of graffiti, and reading them is like scrolling through the comment section of a city frozen in time. There are love notes, there are insults, there are reviews. Somebody scratched near a tavern a complaint that basically reads, "The wine here is poison." People wrote things like, "Cruel one, why don't you love me?" There are guys bragging about women in ways I cannot legally read out loud on this channel. There is gladiator fan art. And then there is my absolute favorite, a piece of graffiti where one exhausted Roman wrote, and I am paraphrasing only slightly, "I am amazed, wall, that you have not collapsed under the weight of so much boring writing." A man 2,000 years ago, standing in the street, roasting all the other graffiti for being lame. That is the single most modern thing I have ever read, and that is actually my one quiet favor to ask you, because the Romans understood something. The wall everybody ignores is the silent one, the blank one. So if you are enjoying this, do the ancient Roman thing, leave your mark, drop a comment, hit subscribe, scratch your name into the plaster of this channel, because a silent wall gets forgotten, and a wall full of voices gets remembered for 2,000 years. The Romans would have wanted you to. Probably. Now, let's talk about dinner, and let's destroy a myth while we are at it. You have heard this one. The story goes that wealthy Romans would gorge themselves at lavish feasts, and when they got too full, they would stroll off to a special room called a vomitorium, throw up everything they had eaten, and waltz back to the table to start again. Decadent, disgusting, iconic, and almost completely false. Here is the truth. A vomitorium was real, the word was real, but it had nothing to do with vomiting your food. A vomitorium was the architectural name for the big passageways in an amphitheater, the tunnels that let huge crowds pour in and spill out quickly. The name comes from the idea of the building disgorging its crowd. So the next time someone at a party tells you Romans had dedicated puke rooms, you get to be that person who says, well, actually, you are welcome. But the real banquets were wild enough without the made-up vomiting. The rich showed off with the most absurd menus they could engineer. Flamingo, roast dormice, which were little fattened mice served as a delicacy, sometimes rolled in honey, songbirds, sea urchins, whole animals stuffed inside other animals. The entire point was not flavor, it was the flex. It was a guy looking at his guests and saying, "I can afford to feed you a bird that is mostly leg and attitude. What are you going to do about it?" And once a year, that entire rigid, status-obsessed society flipped completely upside down. It was called Saturnalia. Think of it as the Roman Christmas, except feral. For several days in December, normal rules were suspended. People gave each other gifts, often joke gifts and little figurines. Everyone wore relaxed party clothes instead of the stiff, formal toga. They drank, they feasted, they elected a mock king of Saturnalia who would shout out ridiculous commands that everyone had to obey. And here is the big one. The social order reversed. Enslaved people were allowed to sit while their masters served them food. And remember how I said gambling was illegal most of the year? During Saturnalia, the dice came out in the open and everyone, including the enslaved, was allowed to play for money in public. The poet Catullus called it the best of days. It was a pressure valve for the entire society, 1 week where the world was allowed to go a little bit mad before snapping back to normal. So that is the Roman at home. Clean, gambling, roasting strangers on walls, eating a flamingo. But none of it, compares to what happened when Romans gathered by the tens of thousands to watch other people compete. So let's step outside into the roar of the crowd. Just take a breath first, because from here on, it only gets bigger and louder and a lot more unhinged. Let's start with the sport that actually ruled Rome, not gladiators, chariot racing. This was the real obsession, the thing that emptied the city and packed the stands. The track, the Circus Maximus, was a monster. Over 600 meters long, and depending on the era, it could hold somewhere between 150,000 and 250,000 spectators. To put that in perspective, the biggest stadium on Earth today holds about 114,000. The Romans doubled it 2,000 years ago for people racing horses, and the fans were not casual. They were organized into teams, factions, known by colors, the reds, the whites, the blues, and the greens, and people did not support these teams. They worshipped them. Fans were buried with their team colors. Riots broke out. The rivalry between blues and greens got so violent and so political that centuries later in Constantinople, a single argument between the factions exploded into a riot that burned down half the city and killed tens of thousands of people over a sports team. Modern football hooligans are, frankly, amateurs, and the stars of this sport were treated like gods, which brings me back to the promise I made you at the start. The highest paid athlete in human history did not play basketball. He did not play football. He drove a chariot, and his name was Gaius Apuleius Diocles. He came from what is now Spain and Portugal. He raced for 24 years, and over that career, he won a recorded 35 million sesterces and change. When historians try to convert that into today's money, the estimates land somewhere around $15 billion. $15 billion. That makes him richer than basically any athlete alive. And the kicker, the detail that I love, is that this man, the richest sportsman who ever lived, was probably illiterate. He likely could not read his own fan mail. He just happened to be the best in the world at not dying while driving 4 horses at full speed around a stone track. Respect. Which finally brings us to the part you have been waiting for. The arena. The gladiators. And here is myth number 2 that I get to break for you. Most gladiator fights were not to the death. I know. But think about it economically. A trained gladiator was an enormous investment. Years of food, training, and medical care went into each one. Sending your prize fighter out to die every weekend would be like a football club benching their star striker by setting him on fire. It happened. Death happened. But a lot of fights ended when one man yielded, and skilled fighters could fight for years. And not all of them were enslaved prisoners forced into it. Some were free men, volunteers, who signed up willingly for the money and the fame. And the fame was real because gladiators were sex symbols. We know this because, again, the Romans wrote it on the walls. In Pompeii, there is graffiti about a gladiator named Celadus the Thracian, and the inscription calls him, roughly, the heartthrob of the girls, the one who makes the girls sigh. There is another about a fighter described as the man the girls swoon for. These were the celebrity crushes of the ancient world, posters scratched into stone by fans. Alongside the gladiators were the venations, the beast hunts, where Romans imported exotic animals from across the empire, lions, bears, leopards, even hippos, just to stage hunts and fights in the arena for an afternoon's entertainment. But I promised you something at the very beginning. I told you the Romans once filled a stadium with water, so let me pay that off, because this is the most insane thing they ever did for fun. They called it a naumachia, a staged naval battle. They would take a flooded basin, or in some cases, flood an arena itself, fill it with actual water, float actual warships on it, and then have thousands of fighters, usually prisoners and the condemned, fight an actual sea battle to the death for the entertainment of a picnicking crowd. One of these spectacles, staged by the Emperor Claudius on a lake, reportedly involved around 100 ships and 19,000 men. 19,000. That is not a reenactment. That is a war scheduled, ticketed, and watched. People were so desperate to get a good view of these things that, at one event, spectators were crushed to death in the crowd, including 2 senators. They died trying to get a better seat to watch other people die. And then everyone went home and had dinner. So, here is the uncomfortable part I promised you. It is easy to sit here and feel superior to the Romans. Look at these barbarians, we think, cheering at death, addicted to spectacle, worshipping athletes, gossiping in toilets, rioting over sports teams, doom-scrolling graffiti on a wall, but every single one of those impulses is still you. The Romans had a phrase for how their leaders kept a giant population calm and obedient. Bread and circuses, keep them fed, keep them entertained, and they will not ask difficult questions. The emperors knew that a distracted crowd is a manageable crowd, so they gave the people more than 135 days of games every single year. More than a third of the calendar was entertainment. They engineered the most addictive content they could and pumped it straight into the public on purpose, because attention is power, and that is the thing. The same brain that packed 250,000 people into the Circus Maximus to watch chariots, that same wiring that craves the rivalry, the spectacle, the next race, the next fight, the next piece of gossip on the wall, that is the exact same machinery that just kept you watching a video about Romans for the last 15 minutes. You did not evolve out of the Colosseum. You just carry it around in your pocket now. The arena got smaller. The crowd got bigger. So if a 2,000-year-old instinct just held your attention this whole time, you may as well lean into it. Subscribe, leave your mark on the wall, and let the games continue. The Romans would be proud and a little jealous. They had to leave the house for this. You just have to tap the screen.